Have you ever stopped to wonder why even the most notorious criminals in history just don't see themselves as the bad guys? It's a wild thought, right? It all points to this incredible paradox that 99 times out of 100, criticizing someone is, well, it's totally useless. So what are we supposed to do instead? Let's get into it.
To really wrap our heads around this, we've got to start in a pretty dark place. We need to look inside the mind of someone who, by every single measure, was a cold-blooded killer. So I want you to picture this. The year is 1931. We're in New York City, and the whole city is on edge because the police are closing in on one of their most wanted, a man they call Two-Gun Crowley, a known cop killer. Now, this isn't some quiet arrest. We're talking a full-blown siege. 150 police officers. They've got machine guns set up. They're firing tear gas, and you can hear gunshots just ripping through the neighborhood. For a solid hour, it's an all-out war between the cops and this one guy cornered in an apartment. But here is where the story takes a truly unbelievable turn. While all this is happening, while bullets are literally flying, Crowley is doing more than just shooting back. He's writing a letter. And in that letter, he's not painting a picture of a desperate criminal. No, he sees himself as a misunderstood man with, and I'm not making this up, a kind heart. I mean, the disconnect here is just staggering. A few weeks before the shootout, he'd murdered a police officer who pulled him over. And yet, when he was finally caught and sentenced to die in the electric chair, you know what he said? Not, "I'm sorry." He said, "This is what I get for defending myself." In his own story, he was never, ever the villain.
And here's the thing, Crowley wasn't some weird one-off case. We see this pattern again and again. You could almost call it the benefactor complex. Al Capone, the most feared gangster in America, honestly saw himself as a public servant. Dutch Schultz said the exact same thing. Even the warden of the infamous Sing Sing prison said that almost none of the criminals he dealt with ever thought of themselves as bad people. They always have a reason, a justification for everything they've done. So this is the really big question, right? If these guys, men who have done truly terrible things, don't blame themselves for anything, then what on earth makes us think that criticizing the everyday people in our lives is ever going to work? And that brings us right to the heart of the problem. Think about it. When you criticize someone, what's their first reaction? It's not to thank you for your feedback, is it? No, they immediately get defensive. They put up a wall. And why wouldn't they? Criticism feels personal. It's a direct shot at their ego, at their pride. This is just a fundamental truth of human nature we have to accept. 99% of the time, people do not criticize themselves for anything. It doesn't matter how big or small the issue is. Our default setting is not self-blame, it's self-justification. And you know, there's real science behind this. The psychologist Hans Selye nailed it when he said this. We are basically hardwired as human beings to crave approval, and we absolutely dread condemnation. And that's exactly what criticism feels like, condemnation. The famous psychologist B.F. Skinner proved this over and over in his experiments. It turns out that animals, and yes, people too, learn way better and make lasting changes when you reward them for good behavior, not when you punish them for bad behavior. Criticism, at its core, is a kind of punishment, and it just doesn't work. And hey, this isn't just about arguments with your spouse or issues with your coworkers. This principle scales all the way up. We're talking about the highest levels of power, where a few poorly chosen critical words can literally change the course of history. Just look at the epic political feud between Theodore Roosevelt and President Taft. So Roosevelt basically handpicks Taft to be his successor. But when he comes back from a trip to Africa, he just unloads on him, constantly criticizing his policies. So what happened? Did Taft change his mind? No, it just drove a wedge between them, split the entire Republican Party, and ended up handing the White House over to Woodrow Wilson. It was a total disaster. And what was Taft's reaction to all of Roosevelt's harsh criticism? Self-reflection? Nope, not a chance. The guy was literally in tears, saying he didn't see how he could have done anything differently. All that criticism just made him dig his heels in deeper and defend his own actions. Or how about the Teapot Dome scandal? I mean, this was a huge deal. Secretary Albert Fall's corruption got him condemned publicly, and he even went to prison. So, did he feel any remorse? Not for 1 second. In fact, he saw himself as the victim in the whole thing. He felt he'd been betrayed. Okay, so if criticism is a dead end, what's the alternative?
What are we supposed to do? Well, to figure that out, let's turn to one of the greatest leaders in history, Abraham Lincoln, who actually learned this lesson the really hard way.
You know, it's funny, we think of Lincoln as this incredibly wise and patient leader, but young Abe, he was actually kind of a hothead. He used to write these scathing letters and poems making fun of his political opponents. He once wrote one that was so insulting, the other guy challenged him to a duel, to the death. That whole incident was a massive wake-up call for him. He realized sharp criticism was a dangerous game, and he basically never did it again.
Okay, now let's fast forward to the middle of the Civil War. It's right after the major victory at Gettysburg, and Lincoln sees this golden opportunity to finally end the war. He orders his general, George Meade, to attack the retreating Confederate army. But Meade hesitates, and the enemy gets away. Lincoln was absolutely furious. So he sits down and writes this brutal letter, just tearing into Meade.
Now, just for a second, put yourself in General Meade's boots. You get a letter like that from your boss, who happens to be the President of the United States. How would you react? You'd probably be crushed, right? Or maybe angry.
So, how did Meade react? He didn't. He didn't react at all. Why? Because he never got the letter. Lincoln wrote it, got all his anger out on the page, and then he stopped. He thought about it. He put himself in Meade's position and realized that sending that letter would accomplish nothing good. It would only create resentment. So he put it aside. And that lesson, the one Lincoln learned over a century and a half ago, is just as important for us right now. The real solution here isn't to just bite your tongue. It's to make a fundamental shift in your approach, away from condemnation and towards understanding.
Here's a perfect little real-world example. You've got a safety guy on a construction site. His first tactic for getting workers to wear their hard hats was to just yell at them and quote regulations. And what'd he get? Grumpy guys who put their hats on while he was looking. But then he tried something different. He'd ask them in a friendly way if the hats were uncomfortable, and he'd explain why they were so important. The result? The workers started wearing them without any argument or resentment. But if you want a truly incredible example, listen to this story about the legendary test pilot Bob Hoover. A mechanic once put the wrong fuel in his plane, which caused both engines to fail mid-air. He barely survived. So when he got on the ground, instead of firing the mechanic, who was absolutely distraught, Hoover put his arm around the man and said this. He offered forgiveness and trust instead of blame. What an amazing lesson.
So, what's the big takeaway here? Look, any fool can criticize, complain, and condemn. And most fools do. It takes real character, real self-control to be understanding and forgiving. So instead of judging people, let's try to understand them. Let's try to figure out why they do what they do. Because as Dr. Johnson so brilliantly put it, if even God waits until the end of our days to judge us, why should we be in such a hurry?